put me right after the networking break.
Of course. The best timing ever, right?
Yeah.
Well, for those that didn't hear, you just came out to a new song from the Sabrina Carpenter album.
It's the best song on the album.
Yeah.
It's the best song on the #1 album in the country, yes. House tour.
So you work with their team a little bit, right?
Yeah, we just are super fortunate to work with her management, her manager. That whole team is doing an incredible job.
Nice, nice. I haven't listened to the album yet, but I will give it a listen. But what we did want to talk about today is this topic around building businesses around talent has come up so much. Every artist wants to push their entrepreneurial focus forward. It's something that's now more critical in the business than ever. And this is a big reason for why you started Firebird Music. So if you could just give us first a high level on what the business is and what you wanted to achieve.
Yeah, we have a countdown clock, so I'll try to keep it short. I mean, the Firebird, at the core, our mission is to help artists build longer lasting, more impactful, ultimately more profitable careers. And I think the thesis of the company that we founded it on, really, the observation was that artists are these massive direct-to-consumer facing brands that are not fully capturing the value of that brand. And we chalk that up to really two things. It is an infrastructure problem and it is an incentive problem. And so everything that we've done at Firebird has been to try to solve those two things. From an infrastructure perspective, we just think that what it means to be a multi-hyphenate, multifaceted creator in music has evolved what they need to actually manage a brand. If you look at Apple and the way that they manage their brand, it's very different than the way we manage these, what are ostensibly large direct-to-consumer facing brands. And so as we have made investments into management companies, made investments into record labels, that's all in service of building up infrastructure, pairing that with a rich investment in data science, in digital marketing, in finance, and label services, all designed to help artists achieve and capture the full value of their brand. So that's really how we've addressed the infrastructure problem. And then the incentive problem is, look, I look around and see consolidated companies in recorded music. I see consolidated companies in technology to distribute that music. I see consolidated companies in live. I don't see a large-scaled consolidated company on the side of the artist. And I think that fragmentation has a second, third order effect that effectively like move rights to a bunch of different partners and create an incentive challenge where those partners are understandably interested in how do I extract as much value, Steve just talked about it, like how do I extract as much value from the arena tonight? How do I get as many streams today when the album is released? Versus thinking long-term about how do I build a longer-lasting, more impactful, more profitable career for this artist. And so the incentive thing for us is we think we have found a way to structure a relationship with an artist that thinks about equity value and thinks about long-term decision-making. And when you structure a relationship that way, you actually make decisions differently. And so that's what Firebird is. At the end of the day, we earn trust and access from the artist based on our proxy and the execution that we do in working to build up their brand. And then we deploy capital into the things that they make in a way that we think creates incentives that build long-term value.
Can we talk more about the incentives, specifically about how it helps artists make decisions differently? Because as you mentioned, it can be so tough now. Artists can be so focused on first week numbers, streams.
Yeah.
How did I place on Spotify? Where am I buzzing right now?
Yeah.
How do you not just shift the incentives, but shift the mindset to not be so focused on that?
You know, I think artists are doing that themselves right now. I mean, I think it's really hard to see a future where an artist who is a multifaceted, multi-hyphenate creator in any way that they are involved in music are not entrepreneurial in some capacity. And so, you know, but the focus is, so we have a deal with Youngblood that is public, one of a number that are behind it at Firebird, but that to us is sort of the North Star of the kind of structure and relationship between a company and an artist that is trying to build long-term equity value, right? And what that deal effectively does is he's put all of his revenue, all of his intellectual property into a company. We've invested in that business. There's some primary capital that's come off that goes into the business. There's some secondary capital that comes off the table for the artist. But then we're long-term partners in building up what he does. And the reason that matters is if you've watched what happened to Youngblood, I don't know if you saw the VMAs on Monday, but he has like a huge moment where he's sort of taking the torch from the old rocker generation and leading rock forward. And he's had this vision for how to do that for a long time, but that's not something that you can do with just one album. And so the way that we've structured this deal, it's allowed us to make some upfront investments that are now paying off, as he's had an incredible moment when Ozzy passed. Ozzy's last concert, he had a sort of Freddie Mercury Live Aid 1985 moment where he led the crowd in an a cappella song, and Ozzy really sort of passed the torch to Youngblood before he died. But we invested in a documentary together that opened in 1,300 screens across 35 countries. We opened a physical fan club space on Denmark Street in London where the fan club members can come and congregate. It also doubles as a retail store for his merch line. We're not going to make money in year one on either of those things. We are making a lot of money on a go-forward basis because of the world building that's doing, but also the ways in which we're touching fans out where they live. And we're seeing it just in the data from his label. Interscope does an incredible job. I think streams are up 2.5 times this year. The size of the audience just from the start of this year is up 40%. We've increased the number of direct fan relationships that we have by almost 2x this year. And so those are things that you don't do when you are just focused on, as you just said, like, hey, how do I sell as many tickets in Omaha tonight? Or, hey, how do I drive Friday streams? But you step back and say, this is an artist who is going to be creating for a long time. How do we make choices and decisions and investments in service of long-term value?
And I assume another part of this too is likely the deal structure, because we're in this era where these artists want to own as much as possible.
Yeah.
And if they're making deals with labels or they're making deals with event promoters, they want that top line number to be as large as possible. You're running a business with them. Obviously, equity operates different than advances or royalties, but how do you convince them to partner up with Firebird and split? Like, what do those deal terms normally look like?
Yeah, I mean, these things are, every deal has its own nuance around the edge cases. They're not that complicated at the core. The foundational part of it is the same, which is, hey, let's create a company around you, the artist, in which all of your revenue runs through, and the intellectual property and the assets that you create run through that company. And there's also costs. There's people who work for that, and there's things that we spend money on to go support that. And at the end of the day, you've got a P&L, and what's the value of that business today and on a go-forward basis. And we'll come in as an investor today with some upside for growth. And I think one of the things that we've thought about, because you just mentioned it, is, artists really do care about ownership, but this discussion is almost a forcing function for them to think about themselves as those brands and to think about themselves as a business and as a P&L, and then make choices based on how much do they want to own today? Do they feel like they need help to grow in the future? And look, we structure these deals so that if the artist wants to fully buy out their intellectual property that we create together, there's sort of predetermined multiples for them to do that at what we think are super fair and friendly ways for the artist to do that. But I think what we're showing is that as a partner, artists can't do this alone. They are the chief creative officer of their business for sure. There are some artists who are also the CEOs of their business, but you need support and infrastructure to do this right. In the same way that any large consumer-facing brand needs that help. And in all of those other businesses, there are partners who have equity ownership in what gets created. Now, they have to earn it. They can be fired. They can lose that equity if they don't do a good job. But I think that way of thinking and the structure of a deal like that helps drive, again, choices that you wouldn't otherwise make.
And this, of course, is one type of deal that Firebird Holdings invest in. You've also invested in management companies. You've invested on the label side, too. So maybe walk us through from a high level. I know you've raised money in order to do this. What does that look like? And then additionally, how do you think about dispersing that capital between the different types of investments?
Yeah, I think, I talked about infrastructure and incentive. And I think the first couple years of our existence, we were deploying capital into infrastructure, right? And that meant bringing in managers who we felt like with the sort of layer of data science, the layer of digital marketing, and some of the other things that we've built up at Firebird could accelerate and sort of escalate the quality of service of an artist to help them build out their brand. We did the same thing. The labels that we've invested in and partnered with, same thing. Like the brand starts with the music. We've got to be able to look an artist in the eye and say, if it's right for you, we can help you distribute your music across genres and geographies around the world. So that was really the first phase of investment that we made. And I think people looked at it and some people said, oh, are they rolling up managers? Are they rolling? No, we're building up infrastructure to help artists build out their brand. And so the second phase of capital deployment for us now is we've got years of PowerPoint slides with results that show the ways in which we drive artist revenue and other key metrics up and to the right. And so I think what we've been able to do with that is earn that trust and earn the access then. When artists create things that need capital, we're already partner there and able to deploy capital into assets and the things that they create. So that's really the phase that we've shifted into now. That's not to say that we don't still look at ways to build out our infrastructure and make it larger. And so to your question, I think a lot of people talk about the money that they raise, and there's a lot of bullshit in this industry, as people know. I'm happy to be sort of clear about it. I'd say to date, we've deployed probably about $400 million into the things that we've gone after. I would say by the fourth quarter, we'll have another $500 million in dry powder to deploy into both infrastructure and solving that incentive problem by investing in artist assets. But our investors, and we did this by design, my partner Nat Zilka ran a big chunk of KKR for a long time, sort of understood the value of the LPs and the investors that you have in your fund. Our investors are in this because they want to deploy bigger checks than they have. And so there isn't an asset in the music business today that, under the right circumstances, and if the math worked and the strategy and the rationale and the culture and all those fits that we look at to integrate somebody into our ecosystem worked, that we wouldn't have the capital to go do.
And I know a big piece of this has also been management companies specifically. I know you've invested in a few of them there. Maybe from a high level, talk about what is it about management companies specifically. And I ask that because we're seeing people invest in catalog, people are investing in live venues. And not that this is unique. Obviously, Azov Group and others invest in management companies as well. But what is it about that asset that interests you? And what are you looking for when you're evaluating those kinds of things?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Irving, and I had the privilege to study under Irving for a long time and watch what he did. Same thing with Corin Capshaw, who, we're partners with. Those are two guys who understand the power of proximity to the artist and understand how to build artist-friendly businesses around the artist that serves the artist well. And so that's something that we really admired from afar. But we're not sort of buying managers, again, not to just sort of roll them up. Like a manager who really wants to sell is a manager who's about to be fired, to be honest. And so as we talk to managers about joining our ecosystem, there's a whole bunch of different deals and structures that we look at for how they can do that. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of managers are coming to understand that the old model of guy with cell phone isn't how you manage a giant direct-to-consumer facing brand. You need a whole lot of capital, and you need data, and you need resources that I think the traditional management model doesn't necessarily have. So for us, as we talk to managers and artists, we're looking at, first of all, how, what's their proximity to artists? Do they have a broad portfolio of artists who they're working with that we think could benefit from being a part of our ecosystem? Not every artist is going to be an entrepreneur. We're really our bent and our bias is for those artists who are thinking about themselves as direct-to-consumer brands, who are multifaceted, multi-hyphenate creators, and who are entrepreneurs and can benefit then from the infrastructure that we have to do that. And so so that's really what it is first and foremost. It's culture. It is this a human being who we think can step into the next generation role of management? Is this somebody who can think about building businesses versus just coordinating the logistics of getting to Omaha?
And when I thought about your business, it also seemed like there was an attraction because management and managers specifically capture all forms of revenue that the artist is tied to, because we obviously shared the stats at the beginning about some of the recorded music trends, especially on the major label side. But if you're a manager of that cut, it's the touring, it's the merchandise, it's everything. I mean, we're talking about super fans and all this other stuff. The artists themselves are still capturing this stuff, even if certain parts of the business are trying to do it. So I assume that that's also part of the strategy.
Yeah, the manager is the CEO of the artist business usually. And so you asked me, what are the criteria that we look at? Is this person a CEO of the business? And that proximity to the artist, when done well, earns incredible trust and incredible access with the artist. Just look at Irving and Jeffrey, look at Corin Capshaw, look at some of the other really great, strong managers and how well they do that. What seems unfair and actually I think drives suboptimal decision making is if the CEO of a business doesn't have ownership in the business. Because if the CEO of the business doesn't and can be fired tomorrow and is just on a salary, or even worse, makes a percentage of revenue, that CEO is going to make decisions that are inherently short-term and not in service of a longer-lasting, more impactful, more profitable career. Now, Irving and Corin are examples of guys who have understood that long-term vision and made those decisions in that way. But we think that the general incentive structure in the industry has been broken. That fragmentation has created a lot of short-term decision-making that, again, even in just these early stages of some of these artist ink deals that we've done, I think we've demonstrated that that you can make better decisions for long-term equity value when you're partnered with the artist in that way.
Another piece of this is discovering talent in general and making sure that you're finding the best out there. You've talked before about how you've questioned whether TikTok specifically is surfacing the best talent because of algorithms and their own incentives. How do you sift through that to help find the best talent?
Yeah, I think, we spend a lot of money on data, and but most of the money that we're spending on data is on things like getting access to credit card spend data and getting access to real-time search query data and other things that we can collectively build out a fingerprint of an artist fan base, segment their fans, understand the lifetime value of each of those fans, which then helps you understand how much you would spend to go acquire a fan like that, understand where they spend their time online and offline so that you can go and reconnect with that audience, but also find people that look like them and build audience. I think we've gotten, I think we've gotten really good at that. But I think, feed me back the question so that I answer it. You want to know about...
about TikTok and servicing talent.
So how we search for artists. So we spend a lot of money on data there. There's no advantage we're ever going to have relative to anybody else looking at data on the A&R side, I don't think. Look, Island is great at this. Justin Eshak has done an awesome job of building up a data team there to go and find the next artist. We get access to some of that data and we use it, but I think part of the Trojan horse of our business, which has now managers across genres and geographies on the ground going into clubs, label folks going into clubs, is we have a human A&R staff that is very profitable and pays for itself, but is finding those artists who are not just making moments on social media, but actually have a potential to become an artist. And I think that's the hardest thing that A&R execs, and I'm sure there's some here who can speak to it more eloquently than I can, are having right now, which is, hey, there's a moment that's happening of virality around some kind of creator. Is this a moment, or is this someone who can actually become an artist? Because if it's a moment, I should invest nothing in it. If it's somebody that can actually become an artist, here's an opportunity to really earn my way into being an owner and an equity partner in whatever this artist can be. So I think we solve that problem, yes, with data, but we solve the problem mostly with human beings who are on the ground making those gut judgments informed by data about how and whether to invest in an artist on an ongoing basis.
That makes sense. Let's shift gears a bit. We have a few minutes left. You're the host of a very popular podcast called Every Single Album, and you often talk about the business of music at various points of that. You've talked a lot about Taylor Swift specifically, and one of the lines that I've heard you say is, she's the best CEO in the music business. Would love to hear why you think that is, and what is it that she does that you think makes stand above other CEOs in the industry?
Yeah, I think if you look at what Taylor has done, and there are other artists behind her that do, right? Sean Carter manages the Jay-Z brand, and that's like his superpower. And I think some of the most iconic artists understand that relationship between the human and the brand, and they manage it that way. And I think Taylor just has her finger on the pulse of that fan base and understands it. She is deeply embedded in listening it runs through her. And so she makes really great creative and marketing choices as a result of that understanding. And when it's time for her to go away, she disappears. And when it's time for her to engage, she engages, and in the lanes and in the places where her fans exist. And so on top of that, from a business perspective, you've noticed she started to bring a lot of things in-house, slowly but surely, right? All the parts of her live, her merchandise, her recorded music business are starting to be ring-fenced, in addition to her just setting the model for artists owning their art. And the way in which you go about doing that, I think she probably would have preferred to do that from the outset, but I think she's really charted a path for other artists. So those are the ways in which we admire very deeply what she does and try to replicate that with a lot of the artists that we work with.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that stands out is just the amount of artists you hear that just feel inspired, or not just from the artist, but from the ownership perspective, the conversations they're having with their record labels, their partners, because of how they saw this whole situation play out.
Yeah, and I don't, I think the most interesting thing about Taylor's business is that she hasn't actually started a consumer product. And that may be because, the thing about Taylor is she's a non-scalable resource. Every artist is a non-scalable resource, right? Chris Stapleton has built an incredibly successful whiskey brand called Traveler that is a brand that I bet if he wants to, can port to other categories of, goods, right? Taylor hasn't actually done that yet. And so as you think about what's next for her in her life, it'll be interesting to see if that is a place that she goes. But certainly other artists, as they step back and think about how do I make money in my sleep as a non-scalable resource that can't play 700 shows a year because there's only 365 days. Those are some of the ways in which we try to push our artists, entrepreneurs to think about ways to build businesses.
Makes sense. Final question. We'll probably get a Super Bowl halftime show prediction. We'll probably get a Super Bowl halftime show announcement in a couple of weeks. The NFL normally does at the end of September. If you had to make a prediction, who do you think is going to be on that stage in February?
You're asking me if I think Taylor's going to do the Super Bowl. And my answer is I think it got a lot more likely when the Chiefs sucked against the Chargers on Friday night, because it would be weird if it's Travis's last game and she's not watching it. And so now maybe if she's like, actually the Chiefs suck, they're probably not going to be in the Super Bowl this year, maybe that makes it more likely. No, but look, I think what you see in her life is she's going to be doing something else next summer. She's not going to tour. And so I think that would be the place, if you're going to put the new album in a live performance, that you would do it.
Well, we'll revisit this in a couple of months. Nathan Hubbard, thank you.